In the town of Tugger's Peak, Ohio, there's a body of water known as Tater Pond. It isn't much of a body of water. It's a pond around 40 feet across, and at its deepest, it descends just over 5 feet. If a person was hiking through the woods and happened upon it, they would likely find it unimpressive, even unremarkable. To the residents of Tugger's Peak, though, Tater Pond is a place of mystery, and perhaps a bit of fear. According to the stories, its depths are home to a frightening creature that has resided there since long before the first settlers arrived. To people who don't live there, it's merely a myth, or perhaps a scam of a story told to encourage tourism to what is simply an ordinary pond. To the locals, however, the creature is very, very real. Tonight, you'll be the judge. You'll be presented with compelling evidence of the creature's existence. You'll hear from the residents of Tugger's Peak as they recount their experiences. When you've been given all the information, you'll be asked to come to your own conclusions. Welcome to the Nightfall Institute's investigation of the legend of the Tater Pond Monster. Tugger's Pond, Ohio was founded in 1873 by a man named Walter Godspeed. There had been a number of families living in the area already, but it wasn't officially recognized as an Ohio village until Godspeed created its post office. Here is local historian Virginia Bates describing the event.
I wouldn't say that Walter Godspeed created a post office exactly. It was more like he accidentally installed one. On a particularly warm July night, Godspeed wandered out of his house completely drunk. He was a moonshiner, a particularly bad one, but what his booze lacked in taste and safety to consume, it more than made up for in total alcohol content. It was so strong that some of the locals purchased it to strip paint. Godspeed stumbled around for a while until he reached his mailbox. In his drunken haze, he mistook it for a beautiful woman he had met over 30 years earlier, and he pulled it out of the ground so that he could share a dance with it. He danced across the road to the empty lot on the other side before completely passing out. The next morning, a very old and very senile aide to Ohio's governor happened to be passing down that same road. When he saw the mailbox without a house behind it, he famously uttered the words, close enough, before declaring it to be an operating post office. Godspeed was just starting to stir on the ground next to the mailbox, and the aide pointed at him and announced him as the town's postmaster.
Tugger's Peak began to grow and prosper. At the time of its official founding, the population was around 40 people. Over the years, more and more people moved into the area, and today, Tugger's Peak is a bustling town that boasts a population of nearly 150. As the village expanded, more of the surrounding area was explored. Leading this exploration were James Franklin and Joseph Wright. In November of 1876, they discovered a pond in the middle of the woods. There was some controversy surrounding the pond's discovery. Decades later, a descendant of James Franklin would describe it as follows. The two of them took one look at that pond and decided it looked an awful lot like a potato. Its shape, I mean. They also decided that they should name it as such. No matter how hard they tried to decide on the exact name, though, they just couldn't. Wright insisted on calling it Spud's Pond. Not a great name. Franklin, though, demanded that the far better name of Tater Pond be used. There was clearly only one correct answer, and Great-Granddaddy bravely stood his ground until his choice won out. A descendant of Joseph Wright had a slightly different take on the argument. In a short statement given to a local newspaper, she stated, "James Franklin shot my great-grandpa with a rifle over the stupid name. He then proceeded to tell the police that a goose had wrestled the gun from his hands and that the goose had been the one to kill Joseph Wright. It wasn't long after the discovery of Tater Pond that the local people began to report strange sightings there. While there aren't many written records from the time due to a fire started by a drunk woman with a torch, one account has survived. Frederick Haynes described his encounter with a creature the likes of which he had never seen before. I was walking by Tater Pond when I saw a goddamn monster. A fucking monster, I tells ya. Everyone needs to run for their damn lives. Eventually, the sheriff managed to calm Haynes down through a series of stiff whiskey shots and delicate slaps. He then proceeded to recount his story. He had been walking by Tater Pond for no real reason that he could recall, but definitely wasn't because he was looking for a private place to get drunk and strip down naked to sing to the moon, when he had seen a great monster emerge from the pond. It looked like a giant snake, except that it had fish-like scales and a head like a dragon's. As Haynes watched, it dove back under the surface and disappeared into the depths. By his estimate, the monster was at least 60 feet long, and its serpentine body was the width of a large tree. It was the largest animal that Haynes had ever seen. When the sheriff asked Haynes to accompany him back to the pond to investigate his claims, Haynes refused to do so. Word of the monster sighting soon got out, and it caused quite a stir among the locals. The thought of such a creature being so close to their community was frightening. Children were forbidden from going anywhere near Tater Pond, and people went out of their way to stay out of the woods. A village meeting was organized so that the residents could voice their concerns and come up with a solution to the problem. An elderly scientist that had retired to Tugger's Peak, Arthur Blake, was granted time to speak. He believed that the sighting was nothing more than a hallucination from a known drunk. His argument was based around the description of the monster. Haynes had described it as 60 feet long and said that it dove underwater. Blake declared that, in his scientific opinion, the claim was suspect, highly suspect, because Tater Pond was only 40 feet wide and 5 feet deep. The scientist's explanation of his skepticism fell on deaf ears. This was mostly due to the village meeting featuring an open bar. The majority of the gathered people were either asleep, including the person acting as the moderator, or in a drunken stupor. Amelia Ware, a seamstress and mother of 3, misheard Blake when he used the word suspect. She stood up, swayed back and forth for a few moments, then asked, "Did he say the monster's name is Sussy?" Blake, of course, had not said that, but enough of the assembled drunks latched onto it that the name ended up sticking. The monster of Tater Pond was now affectionately known as Sussy. News of Sussy's existence quickly spread. People from as far as 20 miles away came to Tater Pond, hoping to get a glimpse of the creature. In 1901, Donald Blaine was visiting relatives living at Tugger's Peak when he got into an argument with his brother-in-law. The argument was said to have originated over money that Blaine owed his sister's husband from a bet the two had made. After drinking 3 bottles of wine, Blaine had wagered that he could jump off the barn, take flight, and make a large loop around the farm before returning to the roof. This attempt failed in spectacular fashion, but he refused to pay his debt after declaring the flight had only been unsuccessful because he had been cursed by a witch. Still drunk, Blaine stumbled away from the farm and into the woods. It was a moonless night, and he quickly lost his way. Before he knew what was happening, he had tripped over an exposed root and had fallen headfirst into Tater Pond. Blaine described what happened next a few days later to the town minister. As he was submerged in the pond, he noticed a glowing light coming towards him. It drew closer, and he saw that it was a large, snake-like creature that had a number of oil lanterns attached to its body. The creature came up right next to Blaine, gave him a wink, and disappeared like it had never been there in the first place. While Blaine was the only one to see the strange lanterns, he was not the only person to trip into the pond.
8 years after the Blaine incident, a young couple was taking a stroll through the woods when they happened upon Tater Pond. They were trying to reach the local market, but after consuming what they called a thick jug of homemade wine, they ended up going east when they should have gone west. When they realized where they were, they both attempted to turn and run away. Unfortunately, they did this at the exact same moment and became entangled with one another. They had tripped over each other's feet and plunged into the pond. Hours later, they described what happened to the local authorities. The police found it so funny that they told everyone that they could. Eventually, the story reached the mayor, and he declared that every May 18th would be Dumb Lovers' Day. It proved to be so popular that there's still an annual town potluck dinner celebrating it.
In the years to come, more and more stories of the Tater Pond Monster came out of Tugger's Peak. Most people, especially those outside of the community, dismissed these as gossip and folklore. It wasn't until the late 1960s that a group of people decided to search for scientific evidence of the creature's existence. This group was the Society of the Organization of Adventurers. While the name may sound strange, even silly, it was the result of weeks of intense discussions and debate. Two of the members insisted that being a society made them sound more mysterious, while the other two members countered that being an organization was more accurate. The only thing that they could agree on was that they were adventurers, so they simply combined the other two terms with it. Whether to put society or organization first in the name was determined by a coin flip. In the end, it really didn't matter, as the few people that had heard of the Society of the Organization of Adventurers simply referred to it as the SOA. Each of the members came from a different background. Donald Nance was a local butcher and father of 12 children, one of which had been born to his wife. Molly Thomas was a midwife who also happened to be the heiress to the Thomas candy corn fortune of $285.11. Kenneth Vonderblow owned a camera, which, given that no one else in town did due to a belief that having your picture taken would cause your eyes to squirt out of your head, meant that was pretty important. Finally, Robert Toots McMicken, the youngest of the group, had once thought that he had seen a dinosaur flying overhead, but it was later revealed to be a robin. He was also one of Donald's many, many illegitimate children. While they were all very different people, they were united in their quest to find and document hard proof of the existence of the Tater Pond Monster. They were so confident that they would be the first to do this that they publicly declared their intentions at a bar one night. This declaration was met with mixed results. While some of the patrons applauded them for their initiative, others questioned how 4 people that had no training in science or even taken a single science class in school could possibly deliver scientific evidence. One man even asked if the group knew what scientific evidence meant. Donald Nance is documented as having pushed his chair back, stood up, and turned towards that man before declaring, "It's science, not rocket science. How hard can it be?" It is actually quite difficult to gather and present scientific evidence properly. Like, extremely difficult. The SOA expedition set out on July 10th, 1968. The trip took nearly 3 hours, not because Tater Pond was far away, but because they repeatedly realized that they had forgotten things and had to keep going back. They finally arrived just before dark, and after deciding to start their investigation in the morning, they set up camp. The extreme isolation of being dozens of minutes away from their families and loved ones rapidly set in. In an attempt to stave off those feelings, Kenneth Vonderblow wrote the first of many letters to his beloved wife, Regina. Dearest Regina, I write to you with a heavy heart from our long separation. Though my work here is important, perhaps some of the most important work ever performed in any field of study, I must admit that I would give it up without question just to feel the warmth of your embrace again. It's hard to believe that half a day has already passed since I've seen you last. I can only imagine how much the children have grown. Young Carlton, just 4 years old when I left, must now be a fully grown man. And sweet Hannah, only an infant when I last gazed upon her in her crib, will have blossomed into a beautiful young woman with many suitors. I hope that they will still remember their father when I return. Give my love to them, dearest. I miss you all so very much. I shall write you again when I have the time. For now, I must return to my companions, for I am greatly needed. Please do not forget me, Regina, and know that I am yours, always. Sincerely, your devoted Kenneth. Kenneth Vonderbelow proceeded to write another 7 letters to his wife that evening alone. By the time the expedition had finished, he had produced a total of 218 of them. Today, most of these letters can be found in the archives of the Tugger's Peak Historical Society and are available for viewing upon request. These letters were found in a backpack stuffed well beyond capacity at the site where the SOA made their camp. While they were originally intended as nothing more than lovey-dovey communication from Kenneth Vanderbelow to his wife, they have become an important insight into the activities of the group during the 2.5 days of their investigation. An insight which is needed because the Society of the Organization of Adventurers never returned from Tater Pond.